what made you want to buy that farm and still make the trek down there?
It was probably mainly the area. There's a lot of big landowners around there. There was the piece that you're referring to that had a lot of the real high quality deer that came off of it was a 1,400 acre tract. And that piece had one 80-acre parcel that separated me and them, and it was kind of a natural funnel that would lead down to it. So in my mind, I figured during the rut, if you have food, they'll make their way down there, and that was probably the biggest thing. And the fact that a close friend of mine knew the area really well, that was kind of the selling point, because I trusted his opinion. And it's pretty hard to just 2 hours away just guess guess what you're getting. So he kind of pointed me in the right direction, and I just, in my gut, told me to do it.
Alex, how's it going? It's good to see you.
Jake, going good. Glad we could connect, buddy.
Yeah, it's so we were just talking. I think you're the reason I started this mini series, because you had shared a Facebook memory of you've been on the podcast here before, and it's kind of reignited me reaching back out to people that had been on the land podcast and giving like an update, because a lot can happen in 3 years or 2 years or 4 years. And it's even crazier. The land podcast has been going on for that long too. It's another hard thing to really come to terms with. But Alex, you were on here previously. You had bought a piece in Pike County when you were young. How old were you when you bought your first farm again?
I was 21 when I bought that first piece. So
Yeah, super young. Super young. So
been a while.
you had bought a piece, and we had talked about that, and then basically we're gonna pick up from where we left off. But real quick, give us who you are, and then maybe even recap the first farm we bought when you were 21, because that's pretty young to buy a piece.
Sure. Yeah. So Alex Mortensen, owner operator, Buckhorn Land Management. That's kind of a lot of the last podcast we did was based around that. But
Mhm.
I was lucky enough to buy my first piece at 21 in Pike County. We went over the story in the last podcast, but I had a few obstacles. Everything ended up panning out, and I had that piece for I think it was 9 or 10 years, and ended up selling that piece to start Buckhorn Land Management, and that's kind of a recap to get us caught up to where we are today. So
Yeah. Was it hard to sell that farm to start a business? Because that was like, that's another pretty big leap of faith.
you know, it was very hard. I mean, if I'm being honest, it's one of those ones that's darn near a tearjerker. It's like one of the ones that you just almost don't want to let go. But at that point in time, I had two kids, one real young and one baby. Or I think it was on the way actually. So the farm was 2 hours from home, and it just seemed like the right move. I didn't want to see it go. It was a great farm. We had a lot of success there, a lot of good memories there, but it ended up working out for the better. So
Yeah. And so you had sold that farm to start basically a pretty extensive like land. How would you categorize that business? Because you do a lot of different things. So I don't want to miscategorize your business.
yeah, I mean, I started it to do land management. I started it for the things that everybody on the station's listening to. Improving habitat, and it kind of jumped into a little bit of residential stuff. And I, I still like to advertise the habitat side of it because that's what I truly enjoy to do. But
Yeah.
we do dabble a little bit with residential as far as grade work and retaining walls and things like that. But if I was advertising to somebody I didn't know, I'd probably leave that part out.
Yeah, fair enough.
But,
Yeah, fair enough. And so you had started your business, and I know you stay really busy with that. And then you ended up going back to Pike County. I don't think had that happened yet on our podcast.
it didn't. I think our podcast was in like August timeframe, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
And I ended up buying the next Pike farm in October, which makes zero sense because I had sold Pike because it was 2 hours away. And then I turned around and I ended up back in Pike again. So I went down and I walked that farm. And I actually had a friend that worked for an outfitter in that area that was really familiar with the area. He sent me that farm. I went and walked it, and there was just a ton of deer sign. It was in a great location, had majority tillable. I think it was like 38 and a half, if I'm not mistaken, but
Hmm.
it was, I think 25 of it was tillable. So pretty much majority tillable with a few fingers that ran through it, but a lot of potential for food plots, and, the neighbors look good, surrounding neighbors look good. It just made sense. So I ended up
Hmm.
back into Pike County again, and I was there for well, I bought it in October. So I hadn't even really had a chance to scout it. No trail camera footage, no nothing. I just kind of hit the ground running. My wife killed the first deer off of it out of a pop up ground blind, which I haven't hunted out of in 20 years. you know, so that goes to show how much preparation time we had. So, but it was good. I mean, as far as deer numbers, it was great, and we had that for 2 years. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, so you go ahead and
Yeah.
I'll pick up from there.
Yeah. So it was interesting that you sold a piece in Pike and then you end up back in Pike. But that neighborhood was really interesting. There was a pretty iconic farm to the north of there, where in that general region there had been some really great bucks that had been shot. Um, did your wife say you were crazy? Like, we just sold our Pike farm. Why are we going back to Pike?
I don't think she would, just because I mean my wife's a superstar for one, but for two, she loves that area down there. I mean, it was our first farm. We bought that first farm right around the time that she came into the picture, and there was a lot of memories there, so going back down there still feels like home, so
Yeah.
it's a little difficult to make the separation, but I think she was all on board. It was just the fact that, I didn't have the time to utilize it like I wanted. So
Yeah, I remember that the market was really hot in that period of time too. Like, it was actually, I would say it was red hot at that period of time where it was just like farm goes live. It probably was going under contract within the first 2 weeks. Pretty fair uh, assessment of my memory with that time. And so I remember we had talked about it. Um, and it laid out pretty darn cool, with how it did lay out, and it was very interesting. What made you want to buy that farm and still make the trek down there? Like, what pushed you over the edge?
it was probably mainly the area. There's a lot of big landowners around there. There was the piece that you're referring to that had a lot of the real high quality deer that came off of it was a 1,400-acre tract, and that piece had one 80-acre parcel that separated me and them. And it was kind of a natural funnel that would lead down to it. So in my mind, I figured during the rut, if you have food, they'll make their way down there. And I don't know that I've seen anything of that caliber. There were some decent deer down there, but I definitely didn't see any of the ones that they were holding on that huge farm.
Hmm.
But that was probably the biggest thing, and the fact that a close friend of mine knew the area really well. That was kind of the selling point, because I trusted his opinion, and it's pretty hard to just 2 hours away just guess guess what you're getting. So he
Yeah,
he kind of pointed me in the right direction, and I just and my gut told me to do it.
yeah, you got to listen to your gut.
Yeah.
I feel like we just talked. I'm recording a handful of these because I have some travel coming up, and I feel like that came up in another recent conversation that I had. Um, what else? Because you had, how long did you own your original Pike piece? It was for quite some time.
I was trying to think of that earlier. I want to say it was close to 10 years. Yeah, I was right at that 10-year mark, somewhere in there.
Okay, which and remind me, how was that, about a 40?
That was, I think it was just under a 40 as well. I think it was like
Okay,
37 and a half or 38 or somewhere in that
okay,
range.
yeah, roughly a 40.
Yeah, I called it a 40, but
Fair enough. You round
some
up.
people are
When is
picky
it?
about
Yeah. When a stack, you round up.
sure, sure.
Okay. And so when you had sold the piece, start your own business, and then you decided to purchase that piece, what was something that you had really identified with that was important to you on the second purchase? Because, how. So that's question one. Sometimes I get in trouble because I ask multiple questions at once. So that's question one. If you can remember that, and then now I forgot the second question that I was going to follow up with. So go ahead and start with that one.
So I guess the biggest thing for me on the second one that made it okay that I was ending up back down at Pike is the fact that it was a lot of tillable, and I could pay the farmer to do a lot of the food plots for me. I wasn't having to go down there and mow clover every other day. I was doing whatever rotation of crop he had. One year I would leave corn, one year I'd leave beans, and just kind of
Mhm.
we had it figured into our cash rent agreement that he would leave me 3.5 acres of standing crop regardless, whatever the rotation was. So the first year, make sure I'm saying this right. I think the first year was beans and the second year was corn. So
Mhm.
got to see both sides of the farm. Obviously, it changes with the crop. So I got to see both sides of it, and gave me a good understanding of how the deer ran through, and Uh, yeah.
What was better, the corn year or the corn or bean year? What was better?
We've had this conversation 10 times, but I used to be a bean guy, and I know you pushed me at first. You're like, "Well, I don't know, man. The corn's pretty good." And as much as I hate to admit it, I'd probably have to say the corn's going to
I
take
had
it.
to get it on the record. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
It took you about 5 years to get me to say it, but the corn's winning. The corn is
Yeah,
winning.
for sure. Yeah,
Mowed corn. We'll just say that mowed
yeah,
corn.
100%. How long? I remember the second question. How long did you go from not owning a farm to getting back into land ownership? Was that like a 1 or 2 year period, or longer than that?
uh, I think it was a year. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was right at a year. It was the hardest year of my life. It really was. I mean, I felt like a lost puppy. I didn't know what to do. But yeah, I think it was. If anything, it might have been a little over a year, but it was right around a year's time.
Mhm.
But
And I imagine that year when you were out of not owning ground, you had to be shopping relentlessly. Like,
oh man, I told my wife at first. I was like, you know what? I'll take the money. I'll put it in the bank, and it'll feel good. And
mhm,
every day went by, and I was like, I can't do it.
yeah,
Regardless, I gotta get something, and that's part of the reason it pushed me back into down there is because it was a piece I could afford, and it just fit the puzzle. So
yeah. So, was there anything that you learned from that piece? Because you ended up buying another farm, which we're going to get to. But was there anything that you learned about that 38 acre tract for farm number two that maybe shaped you into the next one?
yeah, and you talk about it a lot on here, but it was mainly neighbors. The neighbors was the biggest part because a 40 is tough if you don't have like-minded neighbors. And I'm not saying they weren't like-minded as much as when I bought the farm, they were out of staters on the north and the west, and I really thought these guys are never going to hunt it. They're going to come down maybe gun season and whatever. But I was wrong. What happened was they'd come down during the rut and they would hunt for 2 weeks straight, regardless of wind, regardless of weather, regardless of everything. So it really put a damper on me. And you've also seen where you'll plan a good food plot, you'll get everything established, everything's great. Well, then your neighbors get closer, and that's kind of what happened there. Then I had a piece to the south that really had no timber on it that they started encroaching on that as well. So then I had north, south, and west, that's surrounded by neighbors, and it was just. I'm not gonna say I never had problems with trespassers or anything like that. It was just the sake of the deer never got a break. It was just
Yeah.
constantly moving around, and just that was probably my biggest, I guess, reason for moving. And then when I bought this new piece, the piece that I had bought hadn't been hunted for 15 years, so that was a bonus. And then the piece next to it is an 80 to the east, and it's still not hunted, so that's nice. And
Huge.
then the guy to the north, he's got a small piece that does hunt. He's got it might be a 30 or something like that to the north, and he hunts. But to the west of me is cattle pasture, nobody hunts. And then to the south of me is you can call it a subdivision, but they've each got like 10 acres or 8 acres or whatever it is. So it's a subdivision with acreage, I guess. So
Mhm.
I don't have any signs of them hunting. I don't know if they do or not, but there's definitely nothing on the fences or anything like that. So I guess that was my biggest thing, was just I would eliminate some of the neighbor problems, which
Yeah. Which,
I hate to say problems because they were good people around me. I never had any
yeah.
issues with them. It was just the pressure. But
Yeah, and you can't really fault the human nature of, Alex is leaving all sorts of food and doing all
oh yeah,
this and doing that. Like, let's get closer to that, which is a challenge for sure on even big pieces. But at least you can have more buffer depending on that. But when you have a 40, like, you're limited to where you can put it, and that definitely could be a challenge. Something I remember talking back and forth a decent amount was deciding to put it in a CRP or not, and that's kind of like we had gone around and around that about that in terms of, because you have to own it for a year. So that was kind of the first deal. And then there was in limbo of them taking new applications. When you were in the process of selling that piece, were you glad you didn't enroll it into CRP, or was that a selling point for the people that bought it, that it was not, and they were able to do whatever they wanted?
yeah. I mean, I would say the biggest thing there was it was nice to go through the process for one, and for two, it was nice to get their pricing, because then
Hmm.
that's kind of an advertising piece. When
Hmm.
I had decided to sell, I could say, you know, they offered me this for CRP, the farmers offered me this for cash rent, and they could kind of go into it with a mindset of here's how much income potential
Hmm.
it has, because it seems like CRP is a good way to base it. They're around here anyways, they're somewhat comparable with what cash rent is. So if you use that number, it usually makes it look a little better in
Hmm.
in my mind. So
What was the difference from cash rent to CRP for that farm? Like on what the farmer offered you versus what the CRP would be?
yeah, so that farm was a terrible example, and it was my own fault. But since I was going to buy, or since I was going to enroll in CRP the following year, we pretty much made an agreement that he would just leave me 4 acres of standing crop, and that's my cash rent,
Mhm.
and it wasn't a good deal for me at all. It was my choice, but it
Yeah.
wasn't a good deal for me at all. But the whole reason behind that was I was just going to roll it as CRP, and then the second year was when that CRP was going through all the limbo and the funding and all that stuff. And I was having trouble getting it into CRP. So I said, heck with it, just farm it and we'll go back into another year. And then it'll. So long story short, I went 2 years with no cash rent other than just leaving the standing crop. So it
Mhm.
dollar for dollar, I didn't win,
Yeah.
but it served its purpose for me. I mean, I was down there for the deer anyhow. So
Yeah. But what about when, let's say, if you had to ask the farmer, hey, and this could be ballpark, but what was the CRP quoted at per acre? And then what would the farmer hypothetically be willing to pay if you said, hey, I don't want any crop back, you're just farming it?
yeah, so I never really asked him what he would pay, but
Hmm.
I can say the old farm I had was roughly $220 an acre.
Hmm.
So cash rent was paying about 235. So
CRP.
CRP was paying like 235. So it was actually, which that was 2 years time frame difference as well,
Hmm.
but it was within like $20 an acre of cash rent to CRP. So now if you
Hmm.
get into maybe a little better, that's timber soil down there, so you get into a little better soil that'd probably fluff those numbers around a little bit, but
For sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. If you, let's say you were going to keep that farm, and I'm just curious, if you were going to keep that farm, would you have enrolled it into CRP, or do you think you would have kept doing crops and getting, a substantial, large destination food source, or
if
a different variation where you would enroll, 15 acres into CRP and then leave, how the remaining out of CRP?
sure. So I guess for me, the biggest struggle was I did not want to have to drag equipment down there to do all those food plots. So I would essentially, if I took it out of crops, I was going to have to pay somebody to come in and do corn or beans because I just
Hmm.
don't have the time to go down there and maintain all that 2 hours away. So you would have that expense and say that costs you, we're just for 4 acres, we're just going to say it's going to cost you $2,000, $2,500, whatever it's going to be. If
Hmm.
CRP was going to pay me $5,000, then I'm really only going to get 3 grand. So you would probably be smarter to just work out a cash rent deal. You'd probably come out a little more money ahead to just leave it in crops and get the cash rent deal. But as far as money goes, now I'm
Yeah.
not talking habitat. I'm not talking better for the farm because definitely I would go CRP if that was the case. But the other side of that too that stayed in the back of my mind was the deer numbers down there were very high. So had I have taken the crops out and I went strictly to a 3 or 4 acre food plot, all that deer pressure would have been on just that 4 acres versus the 25. So I don't know that a plot would have made it down there. I mean, the deer
Hmm.
numbers down there were just incredible. I mean, it, it was regular to see 30 to 35 deer in your food plot a night. So it's just it would take a little bigger plot than 4 acres to sustain that. So
Yeah.
so I had that in the back of my mind too. I really didn't want to enroll it and then be stuck with a 3.5 acre food plot that I couldn't do grain on because I'd end up having to
You
go
had
to
to fence.
Hofer or something
You
like
had to
that.
fence it all off, and
Yeah,
then
I mean,
you're
it
two
turn me
hours
into a
away, and
gas.
the fence dies. Deer get stuck in the fence, and yeah, it'd be a
Yeah,
lot to
yeah.
manage.
There was a lot that was going on with that. There was a lot in
Yeah.
my head anyhow of what could go wrong. And yeah, habitat wise, I don't know how much it would have helped because on the east side of it, there was kind of a habitat reserve. They ran training dogs over there for pheasants, so they would run dogs over there in the summer and whatnot. So long story short, it was overgrown CRP that whatever. And to the west was an 80-acre farm that was in CRP, and to the north was thick timber. So I was like, will they bed in it? I mean, probably because I don't really pressure it, because I'm down there. I mean, in 2 years' time, I probably went, 15 or 20 times. I mean, it wasn't very much, so
Hmm.
they probably would have utilized it a little bit, but had you have hunted it like a local did, I don't know that it really would have been a huge factor. So
Yeah. That farm had east access too. How much was that into your because the access on the farm was pretty solid. Was that a pretty big bonus for you?
So the access was the biggest part of the whole thing because there was two fingers that ran east. So it was the whole east side was hard road frontage, and then there was two fingers that ran east west off of that, and I could sneak right up one of those fingers and get right into the back of the redneck blind. Probably, I don't know, 350, 400 yards off the road, and almost never be detected. You
Hmm.
you could almost like you're not even pressuring the farm. They never
Hmm.
knew you were there as long as you didn't get out while they were in the plot or whatever. It was that was probably the biggest factor. There was the biggest timber draw that went back there. I probably only hunted 3 times. Because
Really?
I was kind of like we talked in the first podcast. I hunt a little different than some people. I try to draw them to me instead of going to them. So
Mhm.
that was the factor. I put that food plot right at the tip of that wooded finger. I would sneak up the draw, climb in the back of the redneck, feed them to me, and I mean it was almost too easy, if I'm being honest.
You had the mousetrap that worked for that farm. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
it was. It was.
and so you had ended up, so I want to get the timelines right. So at some point you decided, hey, I'm guessing you said, I want to be closer to home. I have 2 young kids. My business eats up a ton of my free time and I want
Yep.
to be close to home. Was that kind of your guys's, as a household, was that your guys' thought process?
Yeah, that was the biggest thing. So I was actually looking for a 40, but I wanted a 40 close to home that I could hunt like after work, close short times on the weekends, things like that, because the time was just so limited. So the deer hunting close to me probably isn't what I would compare it to pike, but it was the fact that I could actually use it, and the family
Hmm.
could use it. You could do more than just see it 20 times in 2 years, so that was
Hmm.
definitely the determining factor. And I got lucky enough to fall into something more, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Uh, but at that time, I was looking for a 40 local. I was planning on keeping pike and then buying a 40 here, and then I would have the best of both worlds. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
So let's talk about that. So you were probably kind of window shopping or shopping in general. I know we would talk back and forth on farms or auctions that were coming up, and so you were shopping for some period of time. How did you end up finding the new farm that would be closer to home for you?
so I actually sent this farm to a friend of mine that has a farm. I mean, it's a half mile away as a crow flies. It's really real close to it. I sent it to him kind of as a joke because when they had first listed it, it was the farm with the house and 78 acres, I think. And I sent it to him, and he's like, "Yeah, right. If I hit the lottery, blah blah blah." And I got to thinking about it, and I was like, I wonder if they just section off a piece of that farm, like because the south side of the road is what I really wanted. All right, actually, I lied to you. The north side of the road is what I really wanted until I walked it. So I sent it to him, and he's like, "Yeah, right. If I hit the lottery," I was like, "Well, you know what? I'm going to try to buy half of it."
Hmm.
So I reached out to the realtor. She's like, "Well, she doesn't really want to split it. Doesn't want to separate the house from it. It's just too much of a hassle and the surveying and all that stuff." So I said, "You know what? I'm just going to go walk it." And I walked it. The north side, I mean, it's probably the better deer hunting piece. It's going to hold more deer for sure. But the south side actually had the perfect topography for me to build a lake and be a nice recreational piece. Maybe in the future, build a house or barn or whatever there. But so I really fell in love with the south side. There was good deer sign, had everything I wanted. It was easy to access. It was just everything I wanted. So I reached out to her again and I said, "You know what? If you'll just section off the south side, I'll buy it." And she's like, I don't want to section it, but if I was to section it, I would want to sell the whole farm, and then just section off the house. So I put some thought into it and I was like, "You know what? I think I can make it work. I'll just buy the whole farm, and if it doesn't work out in the future or whatever, then the
Sell
farm
it.
lays
Yeah.
out. I guess I left one part out. The farm lays out as an 80 essentially, and there's 40 to the north, 40 to the south, and there's a hard road that separates it dead in the middle. So it'd be really easy to separate if a guy ever wanted to, but you had to have that in the back of your mind. If it didn't turn out how I wanted, I'd section off the north side. I'd keep the south side, which is what I ideally wanted. And now I've kind of fallen in love with both sides, and I don't really plan on separating it at all. But
Mhm.
that was what was in my mind when I bought it. So
If you want to know where property boundaries are for public or private, you want to develop a great plan for your farm, document perfect access to a blind, to a tree stand, carve out and measure food plots, connect your Moultrie trail cameras to an app that shows exactly where they're at, and you can look at the feed for that specific camera location, then Onyx is something you need to check out. It is the only mapping software I use when it comes to deer hunting. I've tried other pieces of software, different apps, and I always go back to Onyx because I think it is the most comprehensive, easy to use, and robust mapping software there is when it comes to hunting and land ownership. You want to send a pen to a friend, boom, send it to them right to text, opens it up. Maybe you have notes, maybe you have pictures on that pin, transfers all of it. You want to send a whole entire folder of a plan that you mocked up, you can do that on Onyx. So be sure to check out Onyx. They are a huge supporter of the Land Podcast. They allow us to travel around and talk to some folks that can give you really good insight and good information no matter where you're at in your process of buying land. Let's get back to the conversation.
Well, I think it's really important to look at something like that when you're buying it. Obviously, everyone's nervous to spend any type of money like that, but to know you have some safeguards of like, if we don't sell the other farm or things get tight, like we have options to where we can keep what we want, potentially sell what's not as important, and still be fine. Like I think that's a pretty important thing, and honestly, a conversation I have with a lot of clients too. Like, okay, what if my business doesn't do well, and what are my options? And I think that's really important to do so. So you end up putting an offer on the whole kit and caboodle minus the house.
I did. So it actually worked out really well because it was cheaper per acre for me to buy it as an 80 than it was for me to try to, because the original plan was I would pay for the survey and take the south side. Well, she didn't want to separate it. She said she'd take the survey and just sell the whole farm. So long story short, I got cheaper price per acre. She paid the survey, which turned out to be quite a bit, because I guess I can touch on just a little bit of it, but I didn't realize it, but in Peoria County, when they survey off a house like that, you have to do it in a 20-acre parcel. So they wouldn't separate off the house from an 80. So they had to separate it into a 20. Well, I wasn't really willing to give 20 acres to the house. So long story short, they had to get it surveyed twice. They had to survey it into a 20, and then they had to turn around and take 3 acres out of the 20. So it kind of just like, it was weird, because as the plot reads, it's still that 77 or whatever,
Mhm.
but it was just really confusing to me that they had to do that 20-acre parcel before they could do the 3-acre parcel. The good thing is they let me draw the property lines and say, here's how I want it to be, so that was ideal. And I probably would have done it maybe a little bit different now knowing what I know now, but it worked out. So
Yeah. Were you concerned at all of like, man, I guess the 3 acres that remained at the house, could there be any deer hunting on that 3 acres that you were concerned about?
there could be, it would be tough, but to be honest, the bigger thing for me was I actually, like I said, I chose where the property lines were, and there was a section that was next to it that was tillable that probably would have made sense to give them, but all I could think about was if I sold them that tillable piece and it turned into like a dirt bike track or a four-wheeler track or something, I was like, man, if I give them this, this thick, nasty timber, this wooded draw that's not really, accessible, there's a lot less chance that I'll have intrusion on that 3 acres than I would if I gave them something that they could have big parties and bonfires and whatever
Yeah,
else.
target
It was in the
range.
back of my
Yeah,
mind. I mean,
yeah,
luckily we landed with a good neighbor. He's a young cop actually, but good neighbor, and I don't think that's going to be an issue. But of course, yes, it's definitely in the back of your mind when you do that. So
yeah. No, that makes sense. So you had got that under contract, and then were you like, okay, we need to sell the Pike piece, or was that kind of like all intertwined there?
no, no. So my wife and I actually went out on a date night about, I don't know, a month after we had closed, trying to decide what we were going to do with Pike at that point, because the whole plan was to keep Pike. And we went to dinner, budgeted. Here's how we can make it work. Here's everything, And I started working on the new farm and doing improvements on the new farm. And I started to fall a little bit more in love with the new farm. And I was like, you know what? If I can make this place as good as what I'm envisioning, I probably won't go to Pike at all. I was only going 20 times in 2 years as it was, and if I can have decent deer here and the lake that we built and things like that, well, what's my reason to drive 2.5 hours to get down there? So at that point, it was, roughly, I think we closed in late December, and we had sold the Pike farm in, I want to say April. It was right before planting season. So I think it was around April. So we had about a 4-month window there that we put a lot of thought into it and just decided that I was going to put all my eggs into this farm. So
How did you do on the Pike piece? Because you had bought that when the market was red hot. And then, I would say the market still continued to accelerate to some degree. And then I know you ended up selling it by yourself pretty quickly.
yeah. So I don't remember you might remember, I don't remember the exact dollar we bought it for. It was around the 5,500 mark, if I'm not mistaken.
Sounds
And that
about
was
right.
yeah, I think it was somewhere around there. And I'm trying to remember exactly what I had listed. So the farm, that 1,400 acre tract that we had talked about, sold for buku dollars. And then the one caddy corner from it sold for like $7,800. And it was mainly tillable with a little bit of timber. So I kind of used my own opinion on if that farm sold for that and this farm sold for that, I'm going to list for this. So I listed for 7,800, and I just did it, on marketplace, and just had all kinds of realtors reach out and whatnot, trying to make a deal. And long story short, somebody else used a realtor, and they ended up paying the buyer's commission, and ended up selling it for, I think it was 73 and some change, or 70, right around.
You did good on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it made $2,000 an acre for, 2 years time that I had it, so you made 80 grand essentially, minus the little expenses, but
Yeah. And so did you pay just capital gains? Because obviously you had already bought the new farm, so you didn't 1031 into it. And the reason I bring that up, because everyone's always like, I got a 1031. I have to, or it's criminal if I don't. So
Yep.
I don't ask to poke and prod, but it's just to show that it's okay to do it sometimes.
Sure. So the way I'm going to try to get around this, and there's probably a lot of guys on here who know a lot more about this than I do, and I haven't had to pay capital gains on it yet because it hasn't been a tax year. But what I have done is I have put capital improvements into the new farm, and I'm going to try to get those two to outweigh each other. So I have spent a substantial amount on the new farm with the lake improvements and things like that, and some erosion control and whatever else. And I'm going to try to outweigh
the gains,
the capital gains with the capital improvements. So.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Well, I know you're building, or did you finish the lake? It's a hell. You've sent me some pictures along the way, and it's like, dang, I can't wait to see this thing.
Yeah, it's definitely getting there. So we've got the lakes done, and then the docks done, and it was filling really well until this drought. We got to about, all in all, it'll be roughly 15 foot deep when it's done. It got to about 8.5 or 9, and then I think we've had 7 tenths of rain in like the last 50 days or something like that. I mean, essentially nothing. So it's dropped about 8 to 10 inches in that time frame. So as it sits right now, it's about, I would say, probably 8 foot deep, 7.5, 8 foot deep as it sits right now. So I think it'll make it, but it's not going to be this fall like I was hoping. I said spring originally, but there was some wet weather springs that feed it, and they were really pumping it in. I mean, you'd gain an inch in like a day and a half, just on springs, no rain. And I really got hopeful, but after this big dry spell, the water table fell down, and they're just not pumping anymore. So
how bad did you want to build a lake? Because I know you like playing in equipment, but I've always wanted to build a pond. Like that's something that, I've just wanted to do for a long time. There's a couple good pond locations where I live, but was that something that was important when you guys were wanting to buy something closer to home, to have a pond or a lake?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not real sure why I wanted it so bad. That friend that I was talking about that has a farm real close to there, he actually put one in a couple of years ago, and it kind of lit a little fire behind me. Like, I'd like to have something like that as well. So that was probably part of it. But another big part of it, is, like you said, you've always got to keep it in the back of your mind. Like, what are you going to do with this farm if something bad happens, and being close to Peoria, for me, I feel like if you can sell an established lake with the dock and the play area and the sand beach and all that stuff, I feel like you're almost guaranteed to make a return, you know. So for me, being in the industry that I'm in, I had access to a lot of equipment. I had a lot of close friends that were good on that equipment. So we just kind of partnered together, got it done for probably a fair amount cheaper than what it would have costed for you to pay somebody. So I'm pretty confident I would see a decent return on it if I was to
Yeah.
sell. So that was in my mind. But then I also, the more I worked on it, you know, this is going to sound corny of me, but you've got to feel it at some point that you almost feel like you're putting a staple for the family, you know, like as time goes on, that's going to be something that I can leave back to the kids, you know, and that's something that my wife has always said, like, I want the kids' friends to come to us and have a hangout. And like, I want this. And those words kind of echo in my head. So we're putting like water slides, we're putting rope swings, we're putting sand beaches, we're putting things like this is going to be, it may not be the best deer farm in the world, but
Mhm.
it is going to be the best family farm that I think I could have landed my hands on. I mean, it was the topography of the land pretty much made the lake for me. Uh, Onyx, holy crap! Like I drew that thing out, man, and you would be amazed how accurate it was. So I was using the lines to say elevation change, you know, and I wanted to say like, well, here's where the dam's going to start, here's where the dam's going to end, how far is the lake going to go back, and I was just drawing lines and saving the lines and then just dragging it and seeing like the elevation change to see how deep it was going to be. And I kid you not, after we got that lake done, I bet we were within 4 feet of a full. I mean, it was just impressive. Like kudos to Onyx for that one. I mean, because I was really scratching my head on like what apps to use. I even downloaded a few other apps trying to, you know, make sure that everything was accurate. I used Acres as well.
Mhm.
And but Onyx was just
Dead
awesome.
on. I mean,
It was
for a
awesome.
4-acre lake to be within 4 feet, that is nuts.
It was
You know?
impressive, man. It was
Yeah.
very, very, and even depth, you know, depth was originally I had it scoped out to be 17 foot deep. I ended up building the dam 2 feet less than what I wanted. So it actually ended up at 15. But had I have built the dam to where I had originally planned, it probably would have been spot on. It's at
Mhm.
that 17 foot mark. So I mean it was impressive, man. I definitely I picked the right app for sure.
Do you think that the 21-year-old version of you would ever expect to hear yourself saying that, it's okay if it's not the best deer farm. I want this to be a good family spot. Like there had to be like uh, this surreal to, for words to come out of your mouth, and I get life changes, and those are like awesome, awesome reasons to do that. But I know you're a diehard whitetail hunter, and so it's just um, the juxtaposition of hearing you say that is like, whoa, okay, it's just surprising.
Sure. It definitely, I mean, honestly, it's still hard for me today because I mean I still have some very good areas that I enjoy hunting that I may even still lease there. I don't know, but or buy another farm there in the future. But
Mhm.
it was difficult to know. I think the thing that kept me engaged was luckily the lady that was selling the farm. We were closing in December, and she let me go out there and put cameras in November. So November timeframe, there was quite a bit of buck activity that passed through there. There was one in particular that I would have shot last year had I given the opportunity. I wasn't able to hunt it, but had I been given the opportunity, I probably would have shot it then. So
Mhm.
I think when I say there's not the greatest deer, I mean it's just not comparable to what I had in Western Illinois as far as that
Mhm.
goes. But deer numbers are good. It's just I hope I prove myself wrong,
I
but
think you will. I think you will
yeah,
over
I
time.
hope I do. I really do. I hope I do. But I'm going into it lower expectations and calling it a family farm, where
Mhm.
I am confident there's plenty of does. I'm confident there's plenty of deer that the kids will have a good time. And I hope there's big enough deer that,
Get you
keep me.
excited. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Right.
Well, I have to imagine. We talk about how much can change in 3 years. I feel like if we do this again in 3 years, you're gonna be like, yeah, I did all this, habitat projects and understanding food, and now it's substantially better. Like, if I was a betting man, which I tend to be indirectly, I would take that bet.
I hope you're right, man. That's kind of my goal. I'm trying to stay low key about it because I really don't know. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know what the big deer will do, but I am confident. I've got enough food out there. I've done quite a bit of switchgrass plantings. I planted a fair amount of trees, miscanthus. So I think in 3 years' time it'll look like a different farm, and I think that could improve the buck population as well. So
How did you feel on the purchase price of what you bought? Did you feel like you got a fair shake, or did you feel like like at the time, did you feel like you overpaid a little bit? I feel like that's always an important thing to bring up.
if I'm being honest, I did really well.
Good.
I did really well. Like it was. I don't really want to disclose the price because I don't know if any of my neighbors will be listening. But we'll just say that the appraisal came back significantly higher than what I paid for it. So,
which is always a good feeling walking into that.
My banker, my banker, but my banker called me and he's like, "Man, this never happens." And I was like, "Goodbye, man." I told you it was good.
Yeah, he unfortunately hears that like probably 5 times a week, and then it comes back, at the purchase price there. But no, I think that's obviously, that I would say that was probably an anomaly, honestly, because I feel like the market is still relatively strong. Like every now and I feel like I see like 2 or 3 like legitimate, really great deals a year, and yeah, so I think you kind of right place at the right time and went through the extra legwork to make it work for you too.
I think what happened is you've probably seen it more than anybody, but this is one of those Zillow pieces you talk about. This is one of the Zillow farms that just wasn't advertised. It wasn't on Land Watch. It wasn't on, so it was one of those Zillow finds that just didn't get the foot traffic that it should have, and I think had she had gone with somebody, a realtor that was specialized in land, I think it would have been a whole different ballgame for her, but it just
yeah, well, yeah. If I got my hands on it, I'd be like, yeah, this is a 4 acre lake site, and all these.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been a whole different ballgame. They never mentioned anything about the lake site. They never mentioned anything about really anything other than here's the house and land, and here's what we're asking. And it just they really focused their attention more on the house than they did the land, and the land was worth quite a bit more than the house. So I think. They missed the ball on that one, in my opinion, but it worked out for me. So I won't complain about it.
Yeah, good fortune for you. Well, that had to make, excuse me, that had to make everything just a little bit smoother too. Like going throughout that process, like, well, we can keep Pike, and we have a lot of equity in this piece and everything else. You had texted me a note about equity. I want to bring that up. So what did you? What was your thought for this?
So this actually has nothing to do with me, and if you can't answer it, I'm hoping somebody reaches out to you that can. But I have a close friend that he's from out of state and he wants to buy ground in Illinois, and he's got a vacation rental house or whatever he's got, and he's got quite a bit of equity built up in it, but he's from out of state and he wants to tie that equity from that into buying ground in Illinois. But for whatever reason, the banks won't let him use that as collateral since it's out of state. So do you guys have a loophole through that where he can use that collateral and still?
He probably needs to call some more lenders. I would call Buckhorn Funding. I know they're chartered in a lot of different states. That might be the issue for some lenders, is taking collateral and a different. And I'm not a banker, so I'm just riffing here. But that might be one of the things, because if it's on his balance sheet and he does have a bunch of equity, there should be a lender that will borrow, lend money against another tangible asset that he has a lot of equity in. So that would be my quick take on this. And there's a bunch of bankers that listen to this. There's a bunch of financial advisors that listen to this. So I would lean on to them. But my knee jerk reaction is that he definitely should be able to do something there. Absolutely.
I hope one of them reaches out to you, because he's been trying like heck. And I mean, hats off to him. He's been, 5-6 different banks, and they all seem to tell him the same thing, that they're like, you can refinance it and then you can take that hard cash and do it, but we can't really do it across state lines, and it's just, even my bank said the same thing, so I don't. Somebody on here has a loophole. I hope they reach out to you and can steer us in the right direction. So,
what is it? It's in the United States, just to make sure. Like this is rental property.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. It is in the United States. Okay, that's important. Yep. Okay. Well, that would be we'll get an answer for your friend here, because I think that's an important thing there. Now, I want to talk about anything else on the land transactions that stick out, or anything that I should have asked about that.
I don't know. I had 100 things on my mind, and
was there? How much tillable was on this piece?
There's roughly 40. Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll be little over half tillable.
So are you cash renting that, or are you potentially putting that in the CRP?
That is similar to what we did in the Pike farm, except for I'm actually taking cash rent for this, and we have it figured in to where he will leave me. I think it's. So I took I think 5 acres out and planted it in native grasses and switch and things like that. And then 4 acres of it, he will leave standing crop for me every year, 2 acres on each side of the road. And then I have a 1.5 acre clover plot that I took out as well. So I think all in all, there's like 33 and some change of tillable.
So
and
you
it's
get some
all
good
fixed
food.
into the cash rent payment. So you just leave me food plots standing. So
Yeah, I think that sounds like, dude, I'm excited for you. It sounds like it's just going to get better and better every year.
it's going to be pretty cool. I think it will. Yeah, you need to get down here and walk it with me. Is what you need.
I would love to. I would love to. Maybe like November. Just let me bring my bow. I'm just kidding.
Sure.
No, I would never do
You
that.
got the invite whenever you want.
I would never do that. I'll come fishing when you get the lake ready and rocking. I'm going to be like a stray cat. You won't get rid of me. So I want to talk about, because you work on farms too, and so you do land clearing, you do a lot of different things. So I want to talk about some projects that you think are like, as a guy that is like, okay, I'm going to spend X amount of money and I need this to make sense on paper, and I hopefully will get that out with this improvement. Like, so picture you put a new garage door, you put on a new roof on a house, you remodel the kitchen. So like, that's the frame of mind here. What are some key things that you feel really confident if I called you and said, hey, Alex, I need you to come look at my farm and tell me what projects I need to get done? Like, what's the low hanging fruit that you typically see?
The fastest and easiest bang for your buck would be a road system. I mean, if you put a road system through there to make it accessible, make it easy for whoever's walking it or, potentially buying it, if you could make it accessible is probably the biggest win. The other thing would be, if you can, I think I heard you say it or somebody say it on the podcast earlier, but almost if you can just take the imagination piece out of it, if you
Pat
can
Porter,
make
yeah.
farm like
Pat Porter,
yeah.
he's the one that said it originally. I was like, that is profound.
I think he nailed it. I can't say it a whole lot better than that. I think if you can take the imagination piece out of it, and then you plant, a 10-foot buffer, or, some soft edges or whatever you decide to do, if you can do that and still make it accessible to where they could take their grandkids or kids, stuff like that out there. I mean, it's pretty cheap. It's easy to do. And I mean, sometimes it could be just a day, and a day could change that farm. So,
yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing that always surprises me when, like, I've seen previous work of yours and it's like, this place feels completely new after one weekend or one day. And it's one of those things where I think when people finally crack open the checkbook and get it done, and they're like, why did I not do this sooner? And
yep.
I'm sure you have that conversation with all the people you work with, like, oh man, Alex, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I wish we would have done this 5 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest impact is always mulching, I mean, they always they'll have a section of timber they never use strictly because it's overgrown. And if you can go in there and you mulch it and you make it to where it's actually visible in there again, you make a big impact in a short amount of time. So that's probably the biggest wow factor. But of course, bang for your buck is definitely the road system. So
what, how, like, let's say, how much more does it get complicated when you need to put in a culvert or you need to put in some riprap, or, like where we're at, there's a chance that you don't need that, but a lot of farms you do need to probably put in somewhat of a culvert or something like that. Like, how much does that typically complicate a project?
I mean, of course, there's a lot of variables there. So anytime there's material that needs moved, you have to think about how close can the truck get to that area, because like if you're wanting me to get down in the bottom of a draw and I'm going to have to haul 30 tons of riprap for a mile, a bucket at a time, obviously there's a ton of labor involved in that. So, that scenario, I mean, it changes the game quite a bit, but if it's as simple as just putting a culvert in that's 300 yards off the road, it's really not a big deal at all. So,
Is there a project that sticks out to mind that you had to go in and fix? Like, cause or I guess a project that you had to go and like redo that sticks out in your mind, where it's like, there's all different ways to do stuff. And sometimes it's like the quick fix. And then there's times where it's like the right fix.
There definitely is. So I had a piece in Fulton County, and I still do work for the guy just about every year. But this piece was a land flip deal. They came in, they logged it, they put deer blind up, they did a little food plot, and I don't even know if they had it for a year, but they flipped it.
Buck Land Funding. If you don't know who they are, and you're looking to buy a piece of ground, I encourage you to reach out to them. They're chartered in multiple states across the Midwest, and they understand recreational land. I've said it a million times here on the podcast. The most important piece of buying your first piece of ground is finding a partner, finding a bank that understands what you're trying to do, that has competitive rates and understands the world of recreational land, because not all banks are created equal, and Buckland Funding understands our crazy goals of scooping up a piece of ground to enjoy it with family, to hunt it, to use it as an investment. They understand that and work with that every single day. I encourage you to reach out to them. If you're in the process of buying your first or 20th farm, reach out to Buckland Funding at bucklandfunding.com. Back to the conversation. So you had mentioned that they had to put in some sort of a road system to get logs out, and then you cut out.
Yep. So their biggest goal was to make money off those logs. So they went in and they needed to cross them. So they dumped the culverts in, but they didn't really do any. They knew that they weren't going to hold on to it. So they just rolled a culvert down in the bottom of the ravine. They pushed dirt over the top of it and they ran with it. Well, it created a bunch of problems down the line because those culverts were washing out. The road systems were washing out. Everything was, he wanted to use it as the access, like when he bought it, which was a nice dozer path that just pushed across it and whatever, but it didn't even make it a year, so we ended up having to go in and tear all those out. We put some riprap in for erosion control, ended up putting a 2-inch white rock road down over the top of it. Of course, recut in the culverts, took dozer down there and cleaned those up, and lined the banks with riprap as well. So we ended up fixing it, but it's one of them things that it would have been nice when he bought it, had he have known that, they just threw it in there. So.
Mm-hmm. So that's something that people probably should be aware of if they're looking at something that maybe had a quick turnaround, to really look at some, because I imagine that was probably not a super easy, quick, cheap fix.
When I was just telling you the story of if I had to haul rock for a half a mile, well, that's the piece I'm talking about. It complicates it, and you're doing it. I couldn't get any big machinery back there because, of course, it's through the timber and everything else, so we had the biggest width we could have was 10-foot blade on the dozer and the skid. And that's really all we had to get the job done. So it would have been nice to get a big excavator back there, and you could have if you wanted to tear trees out and do whatever. But we didn't want to take that route, so we did a lot of smaller equipment, and it was quite the ordeal. So,
aside from your lake, is there any big projects that you've really enjoyed doing that you're like, holy cow? Because there's a level of pride with your work because you are making such a huge impact visually and like the infrastructure of a farm. Is there a project that just sticks out to you?
So, yeah, there was one really cool one that we did. I think it was I want to say it was this past spring, but it was another farm that had been logged, and it was quite the ideal layout because the farm had hard road access to the south, and then there was about a 20-acre section of tillable, and then a timber line started. Well, right on the inside of that timber line was a bunch of logs and treetops that they had pushed in, and just an absolute mess. And when he first walked me out there, he's like, I'd like to clear this out and put a food plot here. And I kind of looked at it like, man, there were stumps galore. It was just, they clear cut it essentially, and I was like, man, this is going to be something, So I called another buddy of mine that I do quite a bit of work with, and he brought his dozer out, and then we had the skid, and we flipped that. It was about 2 acres ish, and we got all those treetops pushed to the south side, so the access was awesome. He could sneak right down the edge of that tillable, never be seen, get right in the back of his blind, and cleared out that whole thing, pulled out all the stumps, everything, made it look beautiful. And I wish I could share pictures on here, but he planted it in clover. And by that fall that we did it, he's already getting pictures of good deer, and he keeps sending them to me. And that's the satisfaction for me, because you went from a piece that not only was ugly, but it really wasn't worth hunting, and turned it into a really pretty food plot with awesome access. So that's one that sticks out in my mind for sure.
Yeah, I like it. Is there anything else that people should be aware of before they hire someone to do any sort of, I'll just say dirt work as a very vague thing. I would include food plots as dirt work. I would include road systems as dirt. Like, is there anything else people need to know before they call someone and potentially hire a person?
Yeah, the biggest thing is if you don't know a lot about it, I guess I would I try to get somebody involved that did, whether it's an uncle, a dad, or whatever, that maybe knows enough about it to know that a lot of times you'll call, you know, a random excavation company and they don't have access to the smaller equipment, or they don't want to do it with smaller equipment because it's going to take too long. So then you're getting charged for bringing a big excavator out and a big dozer out, and you're bringing all these things because they don't want to spend a bunch of time there, and they're going to charge you, you know, I'll just throw a number, $300-400 an hour, in labor per machine, just to go out there and do what maybe a skid steer or maybe a smaller dozer would have done, and probably not a whole lot more time. So that's one thing, is just knowing the scope of work and knowing what it takes to get it done. We built that lake this year, and everybody probably would have called me crazy, but actually, I'll tell you a funny story on that. I don't know if we have a whole bunch of time, but
No, let's
on
hear
the
it.
first podcast, I made the comment, if you're looking for a pond, give me a week, and a friend of mine called me out on it. He's like, yeah, he's like, you can do it in a week, he's like, I'll have you over at my house next week, he's like, get over here and dig this thing. I said, man, it won't take much longer than that, So long story short, this pond started. My goal was, I'm going to get this thing done in a week. It's 4 acres, probably not feasible. Had timber in it, not feasible. But my goal was to say, hey, this is possible. I don't need, long story short, took us 10 days, 10 days. And, that was us doing some work and actually grinding at it. But 10 days we had it done with an excavator and 2 dozers. So,
Wow,
but,
that's pretty crazy. And now you have a lake.
and now we got a lake. Yep. Change it, like you said, change it in a weekend, darn near. But,
Yeah, seriously, it's just, I don't know. I feel that having a good plan, and it's like getting blueprints for a house, right? Like, you don't want to build a house. Like, I want a house and this is what we're going to do. Like, there's usually planning that goes into it. Once you have the plan in place and you get the right people in there, like, pretty soon you have this, the stick build's ready, and they're putting the roof on it next week. Like, it can happen so fast once you have a good plan and you have an idea what you want done.
Yep. I think I had a week of on-X time on it too, if you want to add that in. But there was a lot of topography maps going on to get it done. But yeah, I mean, we definitely it changed the game for sure. And if you guys care to look at it, just get on YouTube, type in Buckhorn Land Management, and I did a couple series of progress along the way. So if you guys kind of want to see what we started with and where it was at when we ended, I don't have any updated ones because of course we're in a drought right now, but I will do one this coming spring whenever we start getting some rain again. So
What kind of fish are you going to put in it?
so right now there's red ear and bluegill in it and fathead minnows, and then in November we're going to put yellow perch. And then where I separate from most guys is I'm not a big largemouth fisherman, so I'm going to go with a hybrid striped bass, walleye, black crappie. I think that's it for predators. So I'll have bluegill, red ear, yellow perch, hybrid white bass, or striped bass, and walleye. So yeah,
That's cool. That's awesome, man. Is there anything that you've learned since you were 21 to where you're at today, 3 farms under your belt, that you wish you would have known, for a guy that's listening right now that has been on the sidelines, or maybe he's still in love with his first farm? I fall into this category, that you wish you could tell them, or that they'll listen to?
I guess 2 things that come to mind. And first off, I wish this podcast was a thing whenever I was first buying ground. This is huge, and definitely thank Jake for putting this on, because I have learned so much on it, and I'm still by far not a master, but I wish the knowledge was out there whenever, when I was younger, it was rich people are the only people that are going to buy ground, and it is what it is, and I made it a goal of mine to break that. So one thing I guess I would, words of encouragement, is just be willing to live a different lifestyle for a short amount of time to make it possible, because the hardest part is going to be getting the down payment, of course, but once you get past that first window, I mean, I feel confident today that I could continue to get new farms, and I could continue to buy and sell and be comfortable. So I started with absolutely nothing. And I mean, I mean that when I say it, I was just not very well off. We'll just say that. And I made it a goal of mine to save up enough to buy the first piece. And ever since then, it's kind of fallen together. So it's just getting that first piece out of your way. And I had a mentor that was a close friend of mine, and he'd owned a couple pieces prior to me buying my first. So he kind of lit the fire underneath me to make it possible. I knew if he could do it, I could do it. And I made it a goal of mine. So most of you probably, with it being your first piece, are just looking at that, whatever it is, 50, 75, $100,000 down payment, and thinking there's just no way possible. I can't even afford my car payment, but you have to stop and reassess and say, should you have a car payment, I guess, is the first question, and I'm not telling you to go buy a junker. I'm just saying, those little things are the kind of things that they're going to get you in the first piece. And then you suffer for a few years, and after you get established, land values go up, equity goes up, your life's going to change a little bit. So you just got to suffer through that first little stretch. So
when you started Buckhorn, was that like, okay, this is the land fund? Like when I'm sacrificing my weekends and my evenings, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to own more ground, and this is my side, because you have a regular job. And so was that kind of what kept you going? Because dude, I know you, and you worked your tail off too. Like for anyone listening that's like, oh, it must be nice, Alex, did this and did that. You work really hard.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Buckhorn was obviously in the back of my mind when I sold that first piece. I knew it wasn't the end. I can't go without, like I told you before, I was like a lost puppy dog, not having it for a year, so I knew that I was going to have to do something different in order to buy another piece. I was kind of, prior to Buckhorn, I was kind of stuck in the piece that I had, because I mean, it's as simple as that's all I could afford, so in order to afford more, I just had to make more money, and that's where Buckhorn started. I decided to grind a little bit on that. Luckily, it was what I would call successful, and it helped that fund. But there's a million different ways out there to make money too, So if you're just willing to put in the grind for just a short amount of time, it can definitely get you going. So
no, I love it. Well, I appreciate it, and it's always fun to like rehash this and like have a dedicated hour for me to get caught up with really thoughtful questions. And I really appreciate you sharing your complete journey. It's really cool to hear, and I can't wait to see your piece. If people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I guess if it's habitat related, if it has to do with Buckhorn Land Management, just reach out to me, buckhornlandmanagement@gmail.com. Phone number as well as 309-258-2403. Even if it's not habitat related, I'd be happy to help you. Like we talked about earlier, with trying to help a close friend of mine buy that farm that he's got, I enjoy helping the next guy because I know how hard the struggle is. So if you guys have any questions that I can help with, by all means, just reach out, and I'd be happy to help. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much. Good luck this season. And I'm telling you, when we do this again in a year or 2 or 3 years, you're going to be telling me about all the giant deer on that farm. I'm calling it right now. It's on the record.
Jake, I hope so, buddy. And I hope to see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, you guys take care.